Hello again, Year 5. You ready for the next chapter of the book? You'll remember what happened last time was that Tiffany met Miss Tick, who revealed that she was in fact a witch and a very clever one. Although she didn't quite say she'd been watching Tiffany, I think Tiffany figured it out on her own. Ready? Let's go. Miss Tick removed her hat, reached inside, and pulled out a piece of string. With little clicks and flapping noises, the hat took up the shape of a rather elderly straw hat. She picked up the paper flowers from the ground and stuck them on carefully. Then she said, "Phew! You can't just let the kid go like that," said the toad, who was sitting on the table. "Well, like what?" "She's clearly got the first sight and second thoughts. That's a powerful combination." "She's a little know-it-all," said Miss Tick. "Right, just like you. She impressed you, right? I know she did because you were quite nasty to her. And you always do that to people who impress you. Do you want to be turned into a frog?" "Well, now, let me see," said the toad sarcastically. "Better skin, better legs, likelihood of being kissed by a princess, 100%. 100% improved. Why, yes, whenever you're ready, madam." "There's worse things than being a toad," said Miss Tick darkly. "Try it sometime," said the toad. "Anyway, I rather liked her." "So did I," said Miss Tick briskly. "She hears about an old lady dying because these idiots thought she was a witch, and she decides to become a witch, so that they don't try to do that again. A monster roars up out of a river, and she bashes it with a frying pan. Have you ever heard the saying, 'The land finds its witch'? It's happened here, I'll bet. But a chalk witch? Witch is like granite and basalt, hard rock, all the way down. Do you know what chalk is?" "You're going to tell me," said the toad. "It's the shells of billions and billions of tiny, helpless little sea creatures that died millions of years ago," said Miss Tick. "It's tiny bones. Soft, soggy, damp. Even limestone is better than that. But she's grown up on the chalk, and she is hard, and sharp too. She's a born witch, on chalk, which is impossible." "She bashed the Jenny," said the toad. "The girl has got talent." "Maybe, but she needs more than that. Jenny isn't clever," said Miss Tick. "She's only a grade 1 prohibitory monster, and she was probably bewildered to find herself in a stream when her natural home is in stagnant water. There'll be much worse than her." "What do you mean, a grade 1 prohibitory monster?" asked the toad. "I've never heard her called that." "I am a teacher as well as a witch," said Miss Tick, adjusting her hat carefully. "Therefore, I make lists, I make assessments, I write things down in a neat, firm hand with pens of 2 colors. Jenny is one of a number of creatures invented by adults to scare children away from dangerous places." She sighed. "If only people would think before they make up monsters." "You ought to stay and help her," said the toad. "I've got practically no power here," said Miss Tick. "I told you, it's the chalk. And remember the red-headed men? And Knack McFeegle spoke to her, warned her. I've never seen one in my life. If she's got them on her side, who knows what she can do?" She picked up the toad. "Do you know what she'll be turning up? What'll be turning up?" she continued. "All the things they locked away in old stories. All those reasons why you shouldn't stray off the path, or open the forbidden door, or say the wrong word, or spill the salt. All the stories that gave children nightmares. All the monsters from under the biggest bed in the world. Somewhere, all stories are real, and all dreams come true. And they'll come true here if they're not stopped. If it wasn't for the Knack McFeagle, I'd be really worried. As it is, I'm going to try and get some help. That's going to take me at least 2 days without a broomstick. It's unfair to leave her alone with them, said the Toad. She won't be alone, said Miss Tick. She'll have you. Oh, said the Toad. Tiffany shared a bedroom with Fastidia and Hannah. She woke up when she heard them come to bed, and lay in the dark until she heard their breathing settle down, and they started to dream of young sheep shearers with their shirts off. Outside, summer lightning flashed around the hills, and there was a rumble of thunder. Thunder and lightning. She knew them as dogs before she knew them as the sound and light of a storm. Granny always had her sheepdogs with her, indoors and out. One moment they would be black and white streaks across the distant turf, and then they were suddenly there, panting, eyes never leaving Granny's face. Half the dogs in the hill were Lightning's puppies, trained by Granny Aching. Tiffany had gone with the family to the big sheepdog trials. Every shepherd on the chalk went to them, and the very best entered the arena to show how well they would work their dogs. The dogs would round up sheep, separate them, drive them into pens, or sometimes run off or snap at one another, because even the best dog can have a bad day. But Granny never entered with thunder and lightning. She'd lean on the fence with the dogs lying in front of her, watching the show intently and puffing from her foul pipe. And Tiffany's father had said that, after each shepherd had worked his dogs, the judges would look nervously across at Granny Aching to see what she thought. In fact, all the shepherds watched her. Granny never ever entered the arena because she was the trials. If Granny thought you were a good shepherd, if she nodded at you when you walked out of the arena, if she puffed at her pipe and said, "That'll do," you walked like a giant for a day. You owned the chalk. When she was small, and up on the wold with Granny, thunder and lightning would babysit Tiffany, lying attentively a few feet away as she played, and she'd been so proud when Granny had let her use them to round up a flock. She'd run about excitedly, in all directions, shouting, "Come by, there, walk up," and glory be, the dogs had worked perfectly. She knew now that they'd been worked perfectly, whatever she'd shouted. Granny was just sitting there, smoking her pipe, and by now the dogs could read her mind. They only ever took orders from Granny Aching. The storm died down. After a while, there was a gentle sound of rain. I forgot to switch this on. This is chapter 3, Hunt the Hag. At some point, Ratbag the cat pushed open the door and jumped onto the bed. He was big to start with, but Ratbag flowed. He was so fat that on any reasonably flat surface he gradually spread out in a great puddle of fur. He hated Tiffany, but would never let personal feelings get in the way of a warm place to sleep. She must have slept because she woke up when she heard the voices. They seemed very close, but somehow very small. "Cribbins, it's all very well saying, 'Find the hag,' but what should we be looking for? Can you tell me that? All these big jobs just look the same to me." "Not totally wee Johnny doing at the fishing. She said she was big, a big girl." "A great help that is, I dinna think. They're all big, big girls." "You pair of dafties. Everyone knows a hag wears a pointy bonnet." "So they can't be a hag if they're sleeping then." "Hello," whispered Tiffany. There was silence, embroidered with the breathing of her sister, but in a way Tiffany couldn't quite describe. It was the silence of people hard, trying not to make any noise. She leaned down and looked under the bed. There was nothing there but the gazunder. A little man in the river had talked just like that. She lay back in the moonlight, listening until her ears ached. Then she wondered what the school for witches would be like and why she hadn't seen it yet. She knew every inch of the country for 2 miles around. She liked the river best, with the backwaters where striped pike sunbathed just below the weeds, and the banks where kingfishers nested. There was a heronry a mile or so upriver, and she liked to creep up on the birds when they came down to fish in the reeds, because there's nothing funnier than a heron trying to get airborne in a hurry. She drifted off to sleep again, thinking about the land round the farm. She knew all of it. There were no secret places that she didn't know about, but maybe there were magical doors. That's what she'd make, if she had a magical school. There should be secret doorways everywhere, even of hundreds of miles away. Look at a special rock and say, "Moonlight," and there would be yet another door. But the school, there would be lessons in broomstick riding and how to sharpen your hat to a point, and magical meals and lots of new friends. "Is the bairn asleep?" "Aye, I can't hear her moving." Tiffany opened her eyes in the darkness. The voices under the bed had a slightly echoey edge. Thank goodness the gazunder was nice and clean.
Right, let's get out of this wee pot then.
The voices moved across the room. Tiffany's ears tried to swivel to follow them.
Hey, see here, it's a house. See, wee cherries and thingies.
They found the doll's house, Tiffany thought. It was quite a large one, made by Mr. Block, the farmer carpenter, when Tiffany's oldest sister, who already had 2 babies of her own, was a little girl. It wasn't the most fragile of items. Mr. Block did not go in for delicate work, but over the years the girls had decorated with bits of material and some rough and ready furniture. By the sound of it, the owners of the voices thought it was a palace.
Hey, we're in cushy stuff now. There's a bed in this room with pillows.
Keep it down, we don't want him to wake them up.
Cribbins, I'm quiet as a wee mouse. Ah, there's soldiers.
What do you mean, soldiers?
There's redcoats in the room.
They'd found the toy soldiers, thought Tiffany, trying not to breathe loudly. Strictly speaking, they had no place in the doll's house, but Wentworth wasn't old enough for them, and so they got used as innocent bystanders back in those days when Tiffany had made tea parties for her dolls. Well, what passed for dolls. Such toys as there were in the farmhouse had to be tough to survive intact with the generations, and didn't always manage it. Last time Tiffany had tried to arrange a party, the guests had been a rag doll with no head, 2 wooden soldiers, and 3/4 of a small teddy bear. Thuds and bangs came from the direction of the house.
I got one. Hey, pal. Can your mammy sew sticks this? Ah, he's got a head on him like a tree. Cribbins, there's a body in here with no head. Aye, no wonder. He's a bear. Bring my boot.
It seemed to Tiffany that although the owners of these 3 voices were fighting things that couldn't possibly fight back, including a teddy bear with only one leg, the fight still wasn't going all one way.
I got him. You're gonna give me a heart disease. Someone bit my leg. Come here. Ah, you're fighting yourselves, you idiots. I'm fed up with a pair of yous.
Tiffany felt Ratbag stir. He might be fat and lazy, but he was lightning fast when it came to leaping on small creatures. She couldn't let him get the whatever they were, however bad they sounded. She coughed loudly.
See,
Said a voice in the doll's house. You woke them up.
I'm off ski.
A silence fell again, and this time Tiffany decided after a while it was the silence of no one there rather than the silence of people incredibly quiet. Ratbag went back to sleep, twitching occasionally as he disemboweled something in his fat cat dreams. Tiffany waited a little while and then got out of bed and crept towards the bedroom door, avoiding the 2 squeaky floorboards. She went downstairs in the dark, found a chair by moonlight, fished the book of fairy tales off Granny's shelf, and then lifted the latch in the back door and stepped out into the warm midsummer night. There was a lot of mist around, but a few stars were visible overhead, and there was a gibbous moon in the sky. Tiffany knew it was gibbous because she'd read in the almanac that gibbous meant that the moon looked like what the moon looked like when it was just a bit fatter than half moon. And she made a point of paying attention to it around those times, just so that she could say to herself, "Ah, I see the moon's very gibbous tonight." It's possible that this tells you more about Tiffany than she would want you to know. Against the rising moon, the downs were a black wall that filled half the sky. For a moment, she looked for the light of Granny Aking's lantern. Granny never lost a lamb. That was one of Tiffany's first memories, of being held by her mother at the window one frosty night in early spring, with a million brilliant stars glinting over the mountains, and in the darkness of the downs, the one yellow star in the constellation of Granny Aking zigzagging through the night. She wouldn't go to bed while the lamb was lost, however bad the weather. There was only one place where it was possible for someone in a large family to be private, and that was in the privy. It was a 3-holer, and it was where everyone went if they wanted to be alone for a while. There was a candle in there, and last year's almanac hanging on a string. The printers knew their readership and printed the almanac on soft, thin paper. So a privy's the toilet, in case anyone doesn't know, it's like an outside toilet, like in the picture. Tiffany lit the candle, made herself comfortable, and looked at the book of fairy tales. The moon gibbosed at her through the crescent-shaped hole cut in the door. She'd never really liked the book. It seemed to her that it tried to tell her what to do and what to think. Don't stray from the path, don't open the door, but hate the wicked witch because she's wicked. Oh, and believe that shoe size is a good way of choosing a wife. A lot of stories were highly suspicious, in her opinion. There was one that ended when the two good children pushed the wicked witch into her own oven. Tiffany had worried about that after all that trouble with Mrs. Snapperly. Stories like this stop people thinking properly, she was sure. She'd read that one and thought, excuse me, no one has an oven big enough to get a whole person in. And what made the children think they could just walk around eating people's houses in any case? And why does some boy, too stupid to know a cow is worth a lot more than 5 beans, have the right to murder a giant and steal his gold? Not to mention commit an act of ecological vandalism. And some girl, who can't tell the difference between a wolf and her grandmother, must either have been as dense as teak or come from an extremely ugly family. The stories weren't real, but Mrs. Snapperly had died because of the stories. She flicked past page after page, looking for the right pictures, because although those stories made her angry, the pictures, the pictures, they were the most beautiful things she had ever seen. She turned a page, and there it was. Most of the pictures of fairies were not very impressive. Frankly, they looked like a small girl's ballet class, and they just had to run through a bramble patch. But this one was different. The colours were strange, and there were no shadows. Giant grasses and daisies grew everywhere, so the fairies must have been quite small, but they looked big. They looked like rather strange humans. They certainly didn't look much like fairies. Hardly any of them had wings. They were odd shapes, in fact. Some of them looked like monsters. The girls in the tutus wouldn't have stood much chance. And the odd thing was that, alone of all the pictures in this book, this one looked as though it had been done by an artist who had painted what was in front of him. The other pictures, the ballet girls and the romper suit babies, had a made-up, syrupy look. This one didn't. This one said the artist had been there. At least, in his head, Tiffany thought. She concentrated on the bottom left-hand corner, and there it was. She'd seen it before, but you had to know where to look. It was definitely a little red-haired man, naked except for a kilt and a skinny waistcoat, scowling out of the picture. He looked very angry, and Tiffany moved to the candle to see more clearly. He was definitely making a gesture with his hand. Even if you didn't know it was a rude one, it was easy to guess. She heard voices. She pushed the door open with her foot to hear them better, because a witch always listens to other people's conversations. The sound was coming from the other side of the hedge. There was a field that should have been full of nothing but sheep wanting to go to market. Sheep are not known for their conversation. She snuck out carefully in the misty dawn, and found a small gap that had been made by rabbits, which just gave her a good enough view. There was a ram grazing near the hedge, and the conversation was coming from it, or rather, somewhere in the long grass underneath it. There seemed to be at least 4 speakers, who sounded bad-tempered.
Crevens, we want a coo beastie, not a sheep beastie.
Ah, one's as good as the other. Come on, lads, grab a hold of the leg.
Aye, all the cows that are in the shed. We take what we can.
Keep it down, will ya?
Ack, who's listening? Okay, lads. Jan, Tan, Petra.
The sheep rose a little in the air and bleated in alarm as it started to go across the field, backwards. Tiffany thought she saw a hint of red hair in the grass around its legs, but that vanished as the ram was carried away into the mist. She pushed her way through the hedge, ignoring the twigs that scratched at her. Granny Aiken wouldn't have let anyone get away with stealing a sheep, even if they were invisible. But the mist was thick now, and Tiffany heard noises from the hen house. The disappearing backward sheep could wait. Now the hens needed her. A fox had got in twice in the last 2 weeks, and the hens hadn't been taken away. The hens that hadn't been taken were barely laying. Tiffany ran through the garden, catching her nightdress on pea sticks and gooseberry bushes, and flung open the hen house door. There were no flying feathers, and nothing like a panic a fox would cause, but the chickens were clucking excitedly, and Prunes, the cockerel, was strutting nervously up and down. One of the hens looked a bit embarrassed. Tiffany lifted it up quickly. There were 2 tiny blue, red-haired men underneath. They were each holding an egg, clasped in their arms. They looked up with very guilty expressions.
Ah, no, said one. It's the bairn. She's a hag.
You're stealing our eggs, said Tiffany. How dare you? And I'm not a hag. The little men looked at one another and then at the eggs.
What eggs?
Said one. The eggs you're holding, said Tiffany, meaningfully.
What? Oh, these? Oh, these eggs. These eggs, are they? Said the one who spoken first, looking at the eggs as if he'd never seen them before. There's a thing. And there was us thinking these were stones. Stones, said the other one nervously. We crawled under yon chucky for a wee bit of warmth, said the first one, and there was all these things. We thought they was stones, which was why poor Phile was clucking all the time. Clucking, said the second one, nodding vigorously. So we took pity in the poor thing and put the eggs back, said Tiffany slowly. The one who hadn't been doing much talking nudged the other one. Best do as she says, it said. It's a gang, Agley. You can't cross an Aiken. And this one's a hag. She didn't, Jenny. I know I ever done that before. Aye, I didn't think of that. Both of the tiny men put the eggs back very carefully. One of them even breathed in the shell and made a show of polishing it with the ragged hem of his kilt. No harm done, mistress, he said. He looked at the other man, and then they vanished, but there was a suspicion of a red blur in the air, and some straw by the hen house door flew up in the air. And I'm a miss, shouted Tiffany. She lowered the hen back into the eggs and went to the door. And I'm not a hag. Are you fairies of some sort? And what about our sheep, she added. There was no answer but a clanking of buckets near the house, which meant that other people were getting up. Aye. She rescued the fairy tales, blew out the candle, and made her way into the house. Her mother was lighting the fire and asked what she was doing up, and she said she'd heard a commotion in the hen house and gone out to see if it was the fox again. That wasn't a lie. In fact, it was completely true, even if it wasn't exactly accurate. Tiffany was, on the whole, quite a truthful person, but it seemed to her that there were times when things didn't divide easily into true and false, but instead could be things that people needed to know at the moment and things that they didn't need to know at the moment. Besides, she wasn't sure she knew at the moment. There was porridge for breakfast. She ate it hurriedly, meaning to get back into the paddock and see about the sheep. There might be tracks in the grass or something. She looked up, not knowing why. Ratbag had been asleep on the front of the oven. Now he was sitting up, alert. Tiffany felt a prickling on the back of her neck and tried to see what the cat was looking at. On the dresser was a row of blue and white jars, which weren't very useful for anything. They'd been left to her mother by an elderly aunt, and she was proud of them because they looked nice but were completely useless. There was little room on the farm for useless things that looked nice, so they were treasured. Ratbag was watching the lid of one of them. It was rising very slowly, and under it was the hint of red hair and two beady, staring eyes. It lowered again when Tiffany gave it a long stare. A moment later she heard a faint rattle, and when she looked up, the pot was wobbling back and forth, and there was a little cloud of dust rising along the top of the dresser. Ratbag was looking around in bewilderment. They certainly were very fast. She ran out into the paddock and looked around. The mist was off the grass now, and skylarks were rising on the downs. If that sheep doesn't come back this minute, she shouted at the sky, there will be a reckoning. The sound bounced off the hills, and then she heard, very faint but close by, the sound of small voices. What did the hag say? Said the first voice. She said there'd be a reckoning. Oh, Wally, we're in trouble now. Tiffany looked around, face red with anger. We have a duty, she said, to the air and the grass. It was something Granny Aiking had said once when Tiffany had been crying about a lamb. She had an old-fashioned way of speaking, and had said, We are as gods to the beasts of the fields, my Jigget. We order the time o' their birth and the time o' their death. Between times, we have a duty. We have a duty, Tiffany repeated, more softly. She glared around the field. I know you can hear me, whoever you are. If that sheep doesn't come back, there will be trouble. The larks sang over the sheepfolds, making the silence deeper. Tiffany had to do the chores before she had any more time to herself. That meant feeding the chickens and collecting the eggs, and feeling slightly proud of the fact that there were two more than there might otherwise have been. It meant fetching 6 buckets of water from the well and filling the log basket by the stove. But she put those jobs off because she didn't like doing them very much. She did quite like churning butter, though. It gave her time to think. When I'm a witch with a pointy hat and a broomstick, she thought,
as she pumped the handle. I'll wave my hand, and the butter will just come like that. And any little red-headed devils that even think about taking our beasts will be... There was a slopping sound behind her, where she'd lined up the 6 buckets to take to the well. 6 buckets to take to the well. One of them was now full of water, which was still sloshing back and forwards. She went back to churning, as if nothing had happened, but stopped after a while and went over to the flour bin. She took a small handful of flour and dusted it over the doorstep, then went back to churning. A few minutes later, there was another watery sound behind her. When she turned around, there was, yes, another bucket of full water. And in the flour on the doorstep, there were 2 lines of little footprints, one leading out of the dairy and one coming back. It was all Tiffany could do to lift one of the heavy wooden buckets when it was full, she thought. They are immensely strong, as well as being incredibly fast. I'm really being very calm about this. She looked up at the big wooden beams that ran across the room, and a little dust fell down, as if something had quickly moved out of the way. I think I ought to put a stop to this right now, she thought. On the other hand, there's no harm in waiting until the buckets are filled. And then I'll have to fill the log box in the scullery, she said aloud. Well, it was worth a try. She went back to the churning and didn't bother to turn her head when she heard 4 more sloshes behind her, nor did she look around when she heard little whoosh, whoosh, whoosh noises and the clatter of logs in the box. She only turned to see when the noise had stopped. The log box was full up to the ceiling, and all the buckets were full. The patch of flour was a mess of footprints. She stopped churning. She had a feeling that eyes were watching her. A lot of eyes. Thank you, she said. No, that wasn't right. She sounded nervous. She let go of the butter paddle and stood up, trying to look as fierce as possible. And what about our sheep? She said. I won't believe you're really sorry until I see the sheep come back. There was a bleating from the paddock. She ran out to the bottom of the garden and looked through the hedge. The sheep was coming backwards, and at high speed. It jerked to a halt a little way from the hedge and dropped down as the little men let it go. One of the red-headed men appeared for a moment on its head. He huffed on a horn, polished it with his kilt, and vanished in a blur. Tiffany walked back to the dairy, looking thoughtful. Oh, and when she got back, the butter had been churned. Not just churned, in fact, but patted into a dozen fat golden oblongs on the marble she used when she did it, and there was even a sprig of parsley on each one. Are they brownies? She wondered. According to the fairy tales, brownies hung around the house, doing chores in exchange for a saucer of milk. But in the picture, they'd been cheery little creatures with long pointy hoods. Though the red-haired men didn't look as if they'd ever drunk milk in their lives, but perhaps it was worth a try. Well, she said aloud, still aware of the hidden watchers, that'll do, thank you. I'm glad you're sorry for what you did. She took one of the cat saucers from the pile by the sink, washed it carefully, filled it with milk from today's churn, and then put it down on the floor, and stood back. Are you brownies? She said. The air blurred. Milk splashed across the floor, and the saucer spun around and around. I'll take that as a no then. So what are you? There were unlimited supplies of no answer at all. She lay down and looked under the sink, and then peered behind the cheese shelves. She stared up into the dark, spidery shadows of the room. It felt empty, and she thought, I think we need a whole egg's worth of education in a hurry. And we will... Yeah, we'll leave it there, because it's quite a long chapter today. Okay, guys, you enjoying that? Everybody take care, and I will see you for more next week. Bye.